Hi, I'm Phil Ashey from the American Anglican Council with your weekly Anglican Perspective. We're doing a series called Questions for Global Anglicans in the 21st Century, and we are still on this topic of where does false teaching come from? False teaching in the church. Well, it comes from a secular worldview that has displaced the biblical worldview, and we talked about that last week in terms of the issue of sex and how sex has become kind of the hot button issue. Questions about human gender, about same-sex relationships, about the very definition of marriage, and about leadership in the church and who is qualified for leadership in the church. Well, you know, we have often pointed to this iceberg analogy. And in this iceberg, you can see on the iceberg the polar bear up there with the rainbow, that sex gets, all the attention because that's what so much of the conflicts are about in the Anglican communion around false teaching. But if you know anything about the Titanic, that great ship that was sunk by the iceberg in the North Atlantic, you realize that it wasn't what they saw on the surface that actually sunk them. It was what was below the surface, that part of the iceberg that ripped dashing holes into the hull of the Titanic. And you notice in this iceberg that what's really at stake is the doctrine of creation. What did God make and call good? Wasn't it that he created male and female in his own image? He created them and gave them to each other to leave their parents behind and to cleave to each other and to be fruitful and to multiply. And false teaching in the church denies that very doctrine of creation. Below that, we get the doctrine of marriage. What has God called men and women to be in? Well, if they're not chaste or living a single life, celibate, they're called to be married and to be in families. And below that, what else does this iceberg of false teaching present? It raises the whole issue of authority. Who has authority in the church to make decisions that affect the whole church? Does the Diocese of New Westminster in 2002 and the Diocese of New Hampshire in 2003 have plenary power to change the teaching of the universal church on human sexuality and marriage? Of course not. Well, what's really at stake is Scripture. Do we actually believe the Bible? Its clear and grammatical sense, and its authority in all decisions that we make. Well, clearly those who are involved in false teaching have a very low view of Scripture. And then finally, what is the gospel itself? Because if you accept this secular worldview that we talked about over the last 4 or 5 episodes and the false teaching that has now crept into the church, you no longer believe in creation, in the fall, in the restoration of human nature, in the dignity of God that we find in human beings through Jesus Christ, or the restoration because there's no need for it. There's only the need for human empowerment, human potential, and the fulfillment of all of our natural desires. And that changes the gospel itself from come as you are and let Jesus change you from the inside out, to come as you are and stay as you are. And that is not the gospel. And that is what is at stake. Is Jesus Lord? Is he the one who can change us from the inside out? Do we need changing? Or are we just fine the way we are?